Dave said I should have kept my sweater on from this afternoon. And I said, I'm an engineer and I have to wear a tie. So apologies. Maybe the vibe is more sweater than tie here. Hi, my name's Chuck. It's very nice to be here. I'm a planner and an engineer from a little city called Brainerd in central Minnesota. You said I got to view the island today in all its beauty. And I was going to say, I feel like I was here with the island like without its makeup on, right? Because this is not the most beautiful time of year, right? In Minnesota, I think the most beautiful month is August, September. Like that August is everything's green, beautiful. September, the leaves turn. It's very beautiful. October and November, then we get snow and it's gorgeous. And right now, I think it's beautiful. I think it's absolutely beautiful in Minnesota. But in like a month, it's going to be really gross, and it will be gross until everything greens up. And I'm here, and I can see it. Right? This is my first time here. I can see it, but I realize I'm seeing it without its makeup on. Right? It's not ready to go yet, but it is very, very beautiful. I want to talk tonight about cities, about how places grow and evolve, about some of the things that we have done in relationship to that idea of cities, places growing and evolving. And then I want to talk a little bit about your home and kind of some of my observations from the last 24 plus hours. This is Brainerd, Minnesota. This is my hometown. This is what it looked like in 1870. And I'm sharing this with you not to kind of have you be nostalgic about my town, but just to point out that every city ever built in human history that was built prior to the Great Depression started out just like this. Understand what this is. This is a little collection of pop-up shacks, in our case, in the middle of the northern forest of Minnesota. In your case, a whaling community. The people who arrived here didn't have much. They were kind of out there trying to make something happen. They cut down the trees that were around. They planed them out. They threw up these little shacks, and they said, let's make a go of it. You've got a billiard hall. That's the one I can read right there, billiard hall. So you've got some other buildings here. Cities throughout human history began like this, a little hope and a dream of the future. If things worked out, if things came together, a place like this would grow. It would start to grow incrementally up, start to grow incrementally out, and it would start to thicken up and mature in place. And so you can see that in my hometown. Here it is 35 years later. This is literally the exact same street. This is Front Street in Brainerd, Minnesota. This is Front Street in Brainerd, Minnesota. So like our main street in town. For some reason, we called it Front Street. We have a main street, but that's not that one. This is Front Street. There's a circus parade going in town, so there's a lot of life out here. But take a look at these buildings, right? They're more substantial. They're more mature. In a sense, the city has grown up a little bit. Those little pop-up buildings were torn down and replaced with these more substantive buildings. I think it's important to note that if you visited this city at this time and you went, a block or two off of Front Street, the buildings were going to look something like this, right? The edge of town was going to have those, again, little pop-up shacks as the city grew incrementally out, incrementally up, and become incrementally more intense. My city continued to grow. It ultimately became the county seat, and that meant, a certain amount of flow and traffic through the city on a daily basis. The city continued to grow. Ultimately, Front Street, these wood buildings would be replaced with these buildings of brick and granite. This is the same street a couple decades plus later. Again, if you go off of this a little ways, you're going to see a street like this. And if you kept going further out to the edge, you would see a street like this. There was uh, a regular pattern of development where the city would grow up, the city would grow out, and it would thicken up and mature. This is a pattern that we see repeated over and over and over again around the world. When we study different places, their histories, their patterns of development, we see this maturing process, starting very small and maturing over time. In fact, I have a city that I would like to show you because I often have people say, well, Chuck, that's really cute, your story of your little town, but no, like, real city grows this way. Come on. Yeah, they do. This is a square in a little town you might have heard of. This is what it looked like in 1878. Here it is 20 years later. It's the same square. You might start to recognize it now. There's a little more recognizable because that is, of course, Times Square. Again, we can go back to the early days of Manhattan and imagine it as a collection of pop-up shacks that would mature over time. I was tasked at one point with explaining this concept to a group, a global group that had gotten together in Geneva, and they invited me to speak, and they said, can you just talk about the history of cities? And I'm looking around at this group of people there were people from Mongolia and Ghana and Turkey, and it was crazy. And I'm like, how do I explain this in universal terms? And so this is my best explanation of this process. This is my daughter. This is Chloe Grace Marohn. I adore this kid. When she was born, and everybody who's a parent here knows this, like, your life changes. Everything is different. It's like my heart grew 3 sizes that day, right? It's amazing. I love this kid. And as an infant, she was just delightful all the time. Except when she was waking up in the middle of the night screaming, when she had to get her diaper changed, when she was spitting up on you. When we look at infants, we recognize that they are beautiful and precious and wonderful, and we just get so much joy out of them. But we also, if we take off the rose-colored glasses, remember the sleepless nights and just being like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to end? It's so hard. It's so difficult. Eventually, Chloe grew to be a toddler and then, started preschool, a young girl. And again, such a delightful phase, right? This kid was just full of energy, full of passion, absolutely loved this phase. Grew out of the diapers, sleeping through the night. So all of the stress of this phase was gone. Now, none of those things anymore. Just delightful kid. But what happened? It's replaced with other stresses, right? I'm putting my own shoes on. I don't care if we're late for church. I'm doing this. This is mine, like little fits in the grocery store, all that stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, won't she someday grow out of this? Well, of course, she did grow out of it, right? And with each phase of growing, what you experience in a human is a new set of beauty, a new set of wonderful, delightful memories, great things that you go through, but you also experience a whole new set of challenges. That teenage Chloe was a bear, right? Teenage girls, I've got another one at home right now. They are absolutely trying on, especially on poor mom, but on dad a little bit too. But they are also absolutely, absolutely beautiful. The thing about this process is that we recognize immediately that this is the same person. In each of these phases, this is the same Chloe. No one would look at this. I certainly would not, as her dad, look at this and say, that's not my kid. That is my kid. That's my kid. That's my kid. That's my kid. It's the same person, but in a different form, right? They're also a different person at the same time. There's a maturing process that goes along where we go from one to the next, each with stresses and things that aggravate us, but each with beauty and each with things worthy of celebrating. So let's go back to my hometown again. What is beautiful about this? I can tell you all the things that were were stressful for them, right? I mean, you have mud streets. I don't, if they had an outhouse out back, that would have been cool, right? I don't know where they were getting their water. The river was over the hill there. Maybe they were dragging it up from there somehow. I'm sure this place was stinky and nasty. But what was beautiful about it? Well, there was a lot of like hope and dreams about this place. If we all work together, if we all figure this out, it can become something more. These were a bunch of upstarts. You can think of like a frontier town as being a bunch of bootstrappers, right? In our nostalgic kind of way. I think of like a whaling town as being the same kind of thing. These were people that were kind of hard scrabble, like let's go and figure it out and make something happen. So here you're looking at, and I love, the guy leaning against the tree. These were people who thought, if we come here and we work hard and we stick it out, we are going to gain from this place becoming a more mature place. And that's what happened, right? It matured. It matured to that next phase. When we look at this maturing process, we recognize here, again, all of those problems of the first phase, all of the things that were just, oh my gosh, can we get rid of this? Those are gone. This is not a paved street, but it's it's not a mud street like it was before. They got wooden sidewalks, so you don't have to walk in the mud. At this point, they probably had like a rudimentary drinking water system, not a firefighting type system, but a drinking water one. They certainly had latrines in the back, right? So like a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer, a little bit more sanitary. The stores are nicer, the place is nicer. They're big enough now to get a circus parade come to town. It's pretty cool. This place is really looking up. But there's a lot of things that would have frustrated people about this too, right? When it rains, where does the water go? Well, it just drains into their places, right? It just turns the street into mud. If one building caught on fire, what would happen? Well, the whole town would go down, right? There's all of these like stress points that come with this. We don't solve them all in that transition. We replace old ones with new ones. Here we get to the next phase. And there's some things I love about this. Like I love the barbershop thing right here. But just note, I'm an engineer, so I'm a little geeky. There's your drainage thing in the middle of the street. In those days, that would have been sewer and stormwater, right? We split those today. But back then, there's a nice clean shot to the river, which was right down here, right? We look at that today and we're like, oh, that's horrible. That's the next struggle, right? The struggle then was, can we get the sewage like out of the city? Can we get the street cleaned when it rains? Can we not have that water pour in the building and mess up our street? Can we have it flow out? Can we get paved streets, which we got now? We got concrete sidewalks. We got electric lights and all this stuff. You can see that this is an improvement. Like we matured to something that was better. I'm so grateful you brought. Thank you. It always makes me happy when people bring kids. So don't feel bad about fussiness. You can see that we solved a lot of problems when we matured, but we inherited other ones. I mentioned the combined sewer. That's one that a lot of cities are dealing with today. How do we separate those so we're not pouring sewage straight into the river, that kind of thing. There are many, many others that have come along. This process of evolution and change is something that our ancestors, and I say that in kind of the broadest sense of the word, our ancestors around the world would have understood and kind of taken for granted. This is how cities grew. Until we got to the Great Depression and World War II. After the Great Depression and World War II, we started to build cities in a very different way, with a very different set of inputs, a very different set of expectations, and evolving out of that, a very different set of cultural understandings of what it meant to have a place. I want to show you what this street looks like today. There it is. Yeah, that's the proper reaction. This is with its makeup on, so not that great. This picture I took from the same place this picture was taken. This is up high. I was on the ground when I took it. So you can see, what has been lost. My Front Street today is a collection of parking lots and half-occupied buildings. I want to talk about how this happened and why this happened and what the implications are for us, both here and as a country. But to do that, I want to point out one thing. There's $500,000 of public infrastructure invested in that street. When you add up the road surface, you add up the base, you put in the stormwater and the sewer and the water, you put in the curb and the electric lights and all that, we've put $500,000 into just that little stretch. Where is the wealth that we are going to tap into to pay for that investment? Where's the wealth that we will tax, that the city will then collect to basically pay to fix that street, to fix that sidewalk, to repair that pipe? That wealth used to be there, right? It was there in spades. This was a really, really wealthy street. It no longer is. And when we look around at cities, both across Massachusetts and across the United States, and really throughout Canada as well, we see this conundrum. Our cities are broke. They are financially insolvent. They have more promises that they've made than actual wealth and capacity to meet those promises. And it is, in many ways, culturally kind of ripping us apart. We're struggling to explain how this came about. I want to have a conversation about that tonight. I usually have a transition slide in here, and I took it out, and I wish I had kept it in now. So I'm going to preface this with a little story. The Great Depression was this period in American history of kind of extreme dislocation. People had been going along, you got done with World War I, you had the Roaring 20s, and then all of a sudden, everything overnight became really, really desperately hard. My grandfather was a Marine in World War II. He was actually he was in the first group that went into Nagasaki after they dropped the atomic bomb. So that gives you a sense of his age. He would have grown up, been a teenager during the Great Depression. And I remember him telling me that during the Great Depression, he said he was one of the lucky ones. He could not live at home. He wound up moving in with a neighbor. They allowed him to live in the barn, to sleep in the barn. He worked the farm for them, and then they fed him. So he got to eat 3 meals a day and sleep in the barn, and he worked the farm. And he said he felt very lucky to sleep in a barn in Minnesota. It was 27 below when I came here yesterday in my hometown. So what I took from that is that the Depression was really, really hard in ways that we don't quite grasp. 25, 30% unemployment, massive dislocation. The thing we are taught that got us out of the Great Depression. Let me do a poll here. What is the thing that you're taught in middle school got the country out of the Great Depression? World War II. That's insane. You can see how much our cultural dialogue is dominated by the thinking of economists when you recognize that we all think, or we're all told, that the thing that got us out of the thing that got us out of the Great Depression is a global war where 80 million people died. We dropped atomic weapons, the Holocaust. Like, yay, the economy's growing. You're like, this is crazy talk, right? If you were an American at the time, you knew people who were sent overseas to kill and to die. You knew people who were working shifts at factories that they otherwise wouldn't have been working at. You were having gas rationed, meat rationed, butter rationed. These were not like happy times. But if you're an economist, GDP is going up. If all you care about is like the number, if you were just a bean counter in Washington, D.C., World War II marked the beginning of the good times again. As we got closer to the end of the war, if you study the two world wars of the 20th century, in the first one, it was unclear who was going to win until the last 6 months. it could have gone either way till the very end. World War II, it was clear on December 8th, 1941, who was going to win. It was just a matter of like time and how much resources it would take, how many people would die. It was an attritional kind of thing. And so as the war was progressing, FDR convened people to start to think about and talk about what happens after the war. And the economists around the president were freaked out because they said, when this war ends, we're going to demobilize all these troops, we're going to shut down all these industries, and our economy is going to go right back into the depths of the Great Depression. There's nothing different about America in 1945 as there was in 1935. We get rid of all these jobs, all this growth, and we're just going to go right back into the depths of the Depression. Is that what happened? No. Right. We had the 2 decades of greatest level of economic growth that the country's ever seen. I don't know all of you real well, but you're smiling at me, so I'll take a risk. I'm going to say something that if you know you are a partisan political person, I want you to be extra generous with me or just ignore this. If we go back to the 2016 presidential election, remember that one? How quaint. If we go back to the 2016 presidential election, I remember thinking at the time, I am listening to 2, at the time, 70-ish-year-old candidates describe to me how they are going to restore the best 2 decades of their life. The 2 decades that they recognize as being the best that they lived through. One of those visions was Ozzie and Harriet families and blue-collar jobs. And the other vision was a federal government that could be expansive and do things like expand Medicare and Social Security and build the interstates and all this. Both candidates were talking about the same 2 decades, those 2 decades immediately after World War II, where the troops demobilized and the industry shut down, and we just put all of that capacity into building a new version of America. Not only did we build the interstates and build infrastructure, not only did we subsidize home loans and create a secondary market so people could get mortgages and get into homes, but we created this machine of growth around our cities. We turned our cities into kinetic growth machines, saying if you can just follow this pattern, you can grow and grow and grow and grow. And you will have jobs, and you will have economic opportunity, and you will build a middle class, and people can have homes, and everything will be wonderful. We still nostalgize this couple of decades after World War II as being this like high point in the American experience. I want to show you what this looks like on a map, because we turned cities into machines of growth in order to create jobs, in order to build a middle class. This is Fresno, California, probably the place furthest away from you I could show you. I'm showing you Fresno, California, because I have a really good map of Fresno, California, and it tells a compelling story that I think you will recognize. This is a story really of every North American city, but it's in hyper relief in Fresno. This is the boundaries of Fresno, California in 1897. So I'm going to go through time here, and I want you to see how these boundaries change. Here's Fresno in 1909. Here's 1922. Here's 1934, the middle of the Great Depression, and then here's the end of World War II. Note, in the back of your minds, think of that little pop-up shack to the 2- and 3-story building, to the buildings of brick and granite. That's what's going on in Fresno right now, right? Incrementally growing, incrementally thickening up, incrementally maturing. That's the way all cities have grown throughout all of human history. That's what you see in Fresno prior to this period, up to this point in time. Now, we want cities to grow. We're going to turn them into these machines of growth. We're going to pump all kinds of resources and incentives. We're going to set up all these systems to make sure that they grow over and over and over. And here's what happens in Fresno. 1958, 1970, here's 83, 95, and now 2010 is the last one I've got. At the end of World War II, my city, Brainerd, Minnesota, was 13,500 people. Today, my city is 13,500 people, but it's 10 times the size, 10 times the area, 10 times the amount of road, 10 times the amount of pipe, 10 times the amount of place to provide fire protection and police protection. It's just like way bigger with the same number of people. This has massive implications for our cities, our places, our form of government. I'm going to give you some data now from other places. I'm going to start with this little bit from Lafayette, Louisiana. I was invited to Lafayette by their mayor to help a team that they had put together understand why they were broke. They had been growing very robustly for years, but they couldn't keep up with just basic road maintenance, let alone everything else that they had said they would do. In Lafayette, at the end of World War II, their population was a little over 33,000. Today, it's a little over 120,000. It's grown 3.5 times. It's a huge amount of growth. But when we look at things like their water system, at the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person to provide drinking water for the people of Lafayette. Today, it takes 10 times that amount. At the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people to provide fire protection. Now it takes 21 times that amount. So the city of Lafayette has grown. Yes, they've grown their population by 3.5 times, but they've grown their liabilities by 10 times and 20 times. When we look at things like family income, that's grown by 1.6 times. The actual median household net worth has declined over the last 20 years. And so Lafayette has grown. They've had a lot of transactions. They've had a lot of things going on, but their people have gotten poorer and their community has become vastly underwater. I want to show you what this looks like on the ground. Again, I'm going to go back to my hometown. This is a neighborhood in my hometown that was built platted in the 19-teens. I want you to look at these 2 blocks. These were developed in the 1920s. If you look at them, they're the same size, the same area. They have the same amount of public infrastructure investment to them. It's the same roadway through, the same neighborhood. Everything about them is the same. The only thing that's different today is the style of building we've done on them. In the 1920s, this was the far edge of town, okay? And so what was built out there was the 1920s equivalent of the pop-up shack. That's what you see right here. That's what remains here. All 3 of these blocks were built in this fashion. Little pop-up shacks out on the edge. The people who built those in the 1920s would have assumed, because this is what had happened throughout all of human history, that if they built these places and they made a go of it and the neighborhood worked out, the neighborhood was going to mature and evolve. Eventually their property values would go up. Not the property value, the land value would go up. That would justify more on the site. And so that site would redevelop. It would get a 2nd and 3rd story. The buildings would become more mature, more ornate. That's not what happened. These were built in the 1920s. Then you had the Great Depression and you had World War II. And you have a pattern of development that just skips right over this neighborhood and starts building hyper out on the edge. These blocks have stagnated for almost a century. This block used to look just like this one. The city labeled it blight, got it torn down, and now we have the Taco John's drive-through. I understand that Massachusetts drives on Dunkin'. Is that what I was told when I got off the plane and every 10 seconds since? Taco John's is a Midwestern Taco Bell-ish place. It's like Norwegian Mexican food. We really, really like it. A lot of mild cheddar cheeses. You might enjoy it. You'll have to come and try it someday. Here's the thing. We were really, really thrilled about this change, right? None of these buildings meet our zoning code. They don't have enough parking. They don't have the right setbacks. They don't have any green space. They don't have any of the things that our zoning codes today call for. But This place here checked every box. It checked all the building code boxes, checked all the zoning code boxes. The city bike walk group showed up and said, we would like a sidewalk put in. They got a sidewalk put in. The sidewalk ends right there, but they got that stretch. The environmental group in town showed up, and they wanted native plants in the stormwater area. So this little green patch back here, these are stormwater weeds that they put in there that nobody takes care of, but they checked that box, right? They were happy. Everybody got what they wanted, and everyone looked at this as a huge success. Here's the problem. When you look at this lot, this block here, you add up all these properties, they total $1.1 million. When you look at that block over there, it's the same size area. It's the same amount of public investment. It's the same cost for us to service and maintain. It has a total value of only $600,000. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional pattern of development, the way we have built cities around the world for thousands and thousands of years. You're looking at that in its infant phase after almost a century of decline and neglect. And it still outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we're building brand new today. I did not see a drive-through fast food place in your community. I saw a lot of buildings that felt like gussied up versions of that one, right? We all know, in my town, we all know what that's going to be at some point, right? At some point, that will be a used car lot. There'll be a new taco place up the street somewhere. We'll be looking for some type of grant to get that torn down and rebuilt. This is a really compelling story. It is the story of every city. What I'm going to show you now is a series of places. These are maps that were put together by a friend of mine named Joe Minicozy. He works for an organization called Urban 3. Urban 3 does productivity mapping. So think of a farmer going out and spreading seed across a field. The parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, those are the places we would say are the most productive. So you get like the most bushels per acre. So what we ask here is, where do we get the most value per acre? Where's the land actually the most productive? This is Buffalo, New York. If you've ever been to Buffalo, it's a city that I have a soft spot for. It's a city that's gone through a lot of decline and neglect post-World War II. Really, really struggled. Yet when we step back and we say, where in Buffalo is all the wealth? There's their downtown. And it absolutely dwarfs all the stuff that they build post-World War II. What we see is that everywhere we look, when you go to the pre-Great Depression pattern of development, when you look at cities that were built and mature, you look at the parts of them that were created before the Great Depression, before this switch in our development pattern, they have tremendous financial productivity. It doesn't matter if it is a northern city or a southern city. It doesn't matter if it's a city on water or inland. It doesn't matter cold weather, warm weather. It doesn't even matter if the productive neighborhoods are occupied by the poorest people or the wealthiest people in the community. We see the same pattern repeated over and over and over again. Whenever you have a pre-Great Depression neighborhood, you have high levels of financial productivity. And wherever you have a post-World War II neighborhood, the further you go out in time, the lower the financial productivity goes. Value per acre. Yep. How much wealth are you creating per acre? Property value per acre. Yep. So this is, I mentioned Lafayette, Louisiana earlier. This is a map of Lafayette. And this one looks like the other ones I've shown you, but it's substantively different. Remember I said the mayor invited us to town to try to explain why their city was broke. When we went there, they had a $40 million road budget backlog. They were that far behind in maintenance. They were spending something like $2 million a year, so it was like 20 million or 20-year backlog. Today, their backlog's like $160 million. and they're spending like $4 million a year, so their backlog's like 45 years now. It's crazy. We went and we looked at every source of income that the city had, and we mapped them all up. And we looked at every ongoing expense that the city had, and we mapped them all up. And then we mashed them together into this, which is, in a sense, an annual profit and loss map for the city of Lafayette, Louisiana. Where you see a blue parcel, that is a parcel that brings in more in taxes and fees than it requires in ongoing service and maintenance. Every place you see a red parcel is the opposite of that. It is a property that requires more in ongoing service and maintenance than they pay in taxes and fees. Same basic pattern, right? Core downtown. This is the kind of original neighborhood in Lafayette, Louisiana. I'm going to show you what these places look like. This is their downtown. I like Lafayette, Louisiana. If you've ever been there, cool Cajun music, right? Kind of fun. You can get a cheap taco in the downtown, that kind of thing. But it really is struggling in many ways. No one goes to downtown Lafayette like they go to your place and take pictures and put them on postcards and send them around the world. They just don't. This neighborhood here does not look rich. It's not rich. The poorest people in town live there. But from a financial standpoint, this is the most profitable, outside of the downtown, profitable neighborhood in the city. From a city's perspective. These people pay more in taxes and fees than they require in ongoing service and maintenance. And by the way, our analysis assumes that the city actually does the ongoing maintenance. You can see that they don't maintain this area very well. What that would mean is that that blue line should be higher than what we're showing. So we're assuming that the city will go out and do the things that they say they will do. The fact that they're not only makes this worse. What's all this red stuff? That's all the stuff we built post-war. That's the malls, the strip malls, the big box stores, the drive-through, restaurant places, the gas stations, the windy cul-de-sac-y subdivisions. That's all that stuff. When we did this study in 2015, these numbers will seem off to you, but trust me, the median household income in Lafayette, Louisiana is very, very low. The median family pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. They pay other taxes, but $1,500 goes to the city, the median family. In order for the city to actually make good on all these promises, to fix every street, maintain every pipe, take care of all the drainage systems they've built, do all the stuff, take care of the parks, the fire department, all that. The median family's taxes need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. Basically, 20% of the median household budget would need to get sent just to the city, just to take care of what they already have. That can't happen. It will never, ever happen. And so what we see in Lafayette is what we see in places all over North America, which is a history of robust growth, a history of lots of investment, a history of, individually wealthy people and individually poor people living in a community that is functionally insolvent, incapable of making good on even its base promises. I want to talk briefly about you. And this is always difficult because I teach my team, I'm like, when you go to a place, show them places that look kind of like them, but are not them. Because then they can see them. And if you talk about them specifically, they can't see it because they have too many stories, right? So if I do a talk in my hometown, I never show them Taco John's because they all get mad. But I show them the same thing in like a neighboring city, and they're like, oh yeah, those people are idiots. I want to point out one thing about you that is jarring to me as an outsider, someone coming here, someone with a planning background and an engineering background who's visiting your place for the first time. The pattern of building that you had before the Great Depression, I think we can just like collectively here maybe call it a whaling town maturing over time. That's what it was, right? It's a whaling town maturing over time. And if you squint, you can see it, right? You can still see it. Like that's kind of, when I think of Chloe as an infant and a toddler, that's what you see, right? When we look back, I'm like, I see the gap tooth and I see the blonde hair and the blue eyes. Like I see it, but it's different now today. When we go post World War II, it's fascinating because you have a very distinctive place. And I think you would all say, like, this place is unlike any other. This place is very distinctive. It's very unique. Yes. But you took the same development pattern that everyone else did and you imposed it on your island. You didn't mature a whaling town. You took the zoning code that a third ring suburb of Boston would have used, and you dropped that in here. You took the street standards that a third ring suburb of Boston would use, and you dropped them in here, and you said, this is how we're going to build our island. And it's, I mean, just being here among you and talking to people today, it's created a lot of tension because it's not a development pattern that makes sense in a third ring suburb of Boston. It's ridiculous here, right? Like it really, really just creates lots and lots of tension. The post-war development pattern, and this is why I spent so much time on this, is designed to do one thing. It's designed to grow. It's designed to, everybody in here has heard the term cookie cutter subdivisions, right? It's like the next vinyl siding place over and over and over. And we say that derogatory like it's a flaw. That's a feature. That's not the flaw. That's the whole purpose. Remember, when we got out of World War II, we needed to grow very robustly. We wanted to stay out of the Great Depression. How do we do that? Well, the easiest thing to do is to simplify the code for how we build into a recipe that can be repeated over and over and over like a cookie cutter. That's what this is. Minimum lot size, 5,000, frontage, 50, ground cover, 40, 50%. This is, your code is encumbered by all kinds of like weird things you've done to try to overcome the fact that you have a cookie cutter code. But you have a cookie cutter code. It's designed to just repeat over and over and over. And you can see how this doesn't work if it's like the next ring out of Boston. I mean, we can kind of see that clearly. But you've imposed that on yourself here in a way that is not congruent with your DNA. I was having flashbacks today to a number of places. And I'm going to share these with you, not because I think this is exactly like you, but because I feel like it rhymes with you. I was in Kauai a couple years ago. They invited me to speak at a conference. It's the first time I had been to the Hawaiian Islands. Obviously, immense beauty, right? Natural beauty. Also, tons of tension because, very wealthy people are coming in, buying up things, building large stuff. People who live there, natives who'd lived there, felt very squeezed, very pushed out, like not just second-class citizens, but third and fourth-class citizens. There was this tension between off-islanders and on-islanders, all this stuff. The thing that struck me is that they had every problem that we had in central Minnesota over their zoning codes. In central Minnesota, we're building on 100 feet of sandy gravel. They're building on volcanic rock. So like when we try to drain something, when we're laying out, cookie cutter subdivisions over and over and over, everything just drains because when the water hits the ground, it just drains off. When they do that, they're superimposing it on a hillside of like volcanic rock. When it rains, everything just runs downhill. When they bury pipe in the ground, they actually have to blow up the ground. They have to use dynamite. We just take a backhoe and like dig a hole. It's really easy. They have to bring all their materials in, like on ships. So our insolvency, like all the money problems that we have, they have like them 20 times because every foot of pipe costs 20 times more. Every foot of gravel costs 20 times more. Everything is just vastly more expensive. Instead of taking their island and saying, all right, we're on a volcano. We're going to kind of conform to the landscape and build something here. they took the development pattern that we use in central Minnesota and all over North America and superimposed it in a way that created enormous costs and tons of like, just I'll say cultural friction, because it doesn't make any sense. It kind of pits everybody against everybody because it actually like doesn't work. Okay. I was in Santorini, Greece. Again, I'm not suggesting that you either are Santorini or you should become Santorini. But the fascinating thing about Santorini for me is that Santorini had these places of just natural beauty next to man-made beauty, like human-created beauty. These cities were just spectacular. And they complemented the landscape. But the fascinating thing about Santorini is that it was intense place, right? Village, town, intense place, lots of nature, intense place. And the places were intense because the nature in between was not. Here's the other thing that was fascinating about Santorini. I do this work, so I tend to talk to the waiters, and I talk to the guy who's like with the sewer pipe out behind the building, and I tend to talk to the guy who's carrying out the garbage. Like, explain to me like what you're doing. Like, here's a fascinating thing to me. These people all live on the island. They don't live here. That's insane. These places are worth millions and millions of dollars. They're making tons of money off the people who are coming in and using these. They live in an equally nice place that's not there. Off. Today I got to drive around and see some of the subdivisions that you've built recently that have been with the goal of creating more housing that would be more attainable for people who are not super wealthy. And I'm going to say, I get where everybody's heart is, and I don't judge anyone's intentions. It made me very sad. And it made me very sad because to build stuff like this beautiful on this beautiful part makes, is kind of an easy case to make, because you can make a ton of money and like it works and people will flock there and pay huge sums of money to live literally like above the next person. But in Santorini, they spent equal amount of care building places for poorer people that were just as nice, just as beautiful, had just as much attention to detail, but maybe had less like opulence or size or grandeur, but was like equally accessible. And it made it, along with, the cars were an incessant problem, but not as bad as even here today. And we were there in like August. We were there in peak season because they got a bus system that just runs continuously, that brings everybody to where they got to work, everybody to where their home is. It goes around and around and around. And so everybody doesn't have to have a car to go do everything. It's really an astounding place if you scratch below the surface. If you go there and just enjoy the shops and the restaurants, it's cool. But look around and ask questions. It's astounding. I also, today as we were going through, had Rosemary Beach going through my mind for some reason. And I was struggling as to why. Rosemary Beach is a new urbanist community on the Florida Panhandle. You probably heard of Seaside, which is the very first new urbanist community ever built. This is 2 cities over from that. If you haven't heard of Seaside, if you've seen the movie The Truman Show, that was all shot in the town Seaside. These are resort villages, but they're resort villages with high ownership rates, lots of people coming in and out, lots of rentals, but also lots of people who live there year round. They're real places. Rosemary Beach was the one that kept coming to mind because it's very easy to grasp the architectural sensitivities of this place once you get off the plane and start going through the neighborhoods. Again, you don't have your lipstick on, so it's like gray, moldy siding to an outsider's eyes. I realized that, to you it looks, but I was like, oh, everything's kind of just gray here. Yeah. No, I know. And it's, you get this impression as someone coming here that if we all walked away for 5 years and then came back, it would be gone. Like it's like I feel like you have to constantly fight to maintain everything, right? Because it will just fall apart if you're not repainting and sanding and taking care of everything. So it has that kind of gray, weathered, like you're being assaulted kind of look continuously. Not you, the person visiting, but the core infrastructure, the place. Rosemary Beach, when I was there, I got a really nice tour by the designer of it. The thing that was remarkable to me about it was how exquisitely they use the space. There are parts of your town that are exquisite uses of space. I suspect that they are the pre-Great Depression parts of your town. In fact, I'm almost positive they are. There was a lot just culturally that people understood about space when they experienced a city at 2 miles an hour as the space of people walking. And they just had different sensitivities. They would design things differently. They would place things differently on the land. You can go around to those older neighborhoods, and if you walk through them, you will get an experience that is different than if you go to a neighborhood that was built or even one that was significantly redeveloped in the intervening years. It will feel different. Here's why Rosemary Beach came to mind. As I'm going through, we got to one place today, and everyone in the vehicle is like, oh, this is a really, really nice place. And I have to tell you, I looked around and I'm like, really? I realize you don't have your makeup on. I realize that it's not green and there aren't flowers everywhere. And it's not. But I looked at the space and I'm like, this is such an underwhelming use of what is gorgeous, gorgeous space. Here's what made a place like Rosemary Beach pop. Rosemary Beach does not have a zoning code where you got to go in and meet the R1 and you go to a historic review board and get your shade of your door approved and all that. They don't have that. Those are kind of what I'm going to say are unsophisticated reactions or unsophisticated codes. Rosemary Beach has a town architect whose job is like to make everything fit in. And they go out and they're like, all right, let's look at this. And we got kind of, a small code book of how to build a place on the lot so that it accents and augments its neighboring properties. And then there's a big book of like a pattern book of different types of buildings you could build that would fit in character-wise that are in a sense pre-approved. And you can grab this gable here and this door here and this thing here, put them together architecturally and have it be something that is authentic to their pattern, yet has the originality of the owner, yet can actually be approved and have everybody culturally say, okay, this fits in. It's the next bit of maturing. It's not out of scale. It's not out of, it fits into the neighborhood, but we can actually accomplish this. They don't have, I'm going to say this and I don't know this. They might have a city planner, but they don't have a zoning official the way either you do or most cities do. What they have is a town architect. And the town architect's job is very, very different than a regulatory job. It's actually like a place building job. Okay. I've got just a few minutes left. I want to share with you a couple things from Strong Towns that we recommend. Because a lot of times when I go talk to a place, they'll say, well, okay, Chuck, this is great. You've kind of overwhelmed us. You've given us a lot. How do we get started? And I'm gonna give you two things that are kind of core Strong Towns principles that go together as a way to jump off and get started tomorrow. The first one is that we have to think, and I think it's really critical here, and I think you all feel this tension, we have to find a way to maintain a low bar of entry. Let me give you two visions of this. This is a tiny house, or what we call in my city a tiny house. My ancestors would have called this a house. We've changed our idea of what a house is. Understand that if you want a 30-year mortgage, if you want, to participate in the financing system, the way you have to build, these things are really hard to get through that system. But these are like the essential building blocks of a place. When I showed you that frontier town with the little pop-up shacks, the novel thing about that, the thing that made that beautiful to the people who were there at the time, was that they could actually afford to get in it. It was not that that's where they planned to be for their entire life. It was that they could afford to get in it, and by getting in it, they could get a start, and that start could allow them to progress and move up over time. There was a certain cooperative function that went with that. We kind of talk about market forces being forces that bring out greed, and I can understand why we might think that. But in a situation like this, it's also forces that bring out altruism. If we actually work together, we become more than what we would if we worked individually. A little house like this, you save up a little bit of money, you build what you can afford, you save up a little bit of money, you do an addition. The neighbor comes over and helps, you go help your neighbor. This is the kind of thing that cities have always done. Here's a commercial version of this. In Muskegon, Michigan, they realized that they had a lot of local entrepreneurs with no place to go. The bar of entry into their downtown businesses was too high. And they had all kinds of people who wanted to do stuff, and they were doing it, in weird, funky ways. I heard today a story of someone who's operating a business illegally out of their home. Lots of that going on, that kind of stuff. And we want to unleash these entrepreneurs. Like we really need this type of spirit in our community. And so what they did is they had a gap in their streetscape. They went out, got a bunch of storage sheds, painted them up funky colors, and invited local startup entrepreneurs to open up there. They charge them like $80 a month. They require them to be open at certain times, at the same time, so that they create kind of an energy of the place. But they have people going in and out of here all the time. They come in, they try their business, they fail, they try, they fail, they try, they fail, they try, they figure it out, and then they graduate up to that place they couldn't afford back when they didn't have a business plan and a concept of what they were doing. This is like a low stakes way for people to get started. There's another concept at Strong Towns, and I feel like this is probably the most powerful one. And it really is a contrast with this post-war experiment that we've been on. If you are a local government today, if you are a town, and I heard multiple times today as I was talking to people, oh, we're applying for a grant for this, we're applying for a grant for that, we're doing this, which to me is like the most insane thing. Let me just make a side commentary, not to pick on you all, but I've been part of a lot of places doing grant applications. The very first one I wrote was in 1998 for a city where we went out to people who were living in trailer houses with shallow wells where we were getting fecal coliform in their water. So they were drinking their own sewage. They were not just below the median state income, but they were like below the poverty line. And we applied for a grant to get their sewer systems fixed. I was in Cape Cod a couple years ago, and they were explaining to me how their sewage systems were polluting the lake, and they wanted a federal government grant for I don't know how much to fix that. And I remember thinking, drinking your own sewage, really, really poor people, extremely wealthy people polluting their own lake. I realize that you do get grants. I don't understand how. I really don't. I think in a just world, like I don't know how, let me put it this way. If you need a grant, who doesn't need a grant? And how does that work? Like, who are we going to tax to pay your grant? That doesn't make any sense. So I feel like the grant complex, or the idea that we are going to pursue grants, is because in this post-war expansion pattern, in the idea that we're going to have zoning codes and cookie cutter subdivisions and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and build and road, trail, da. All of that transaction complex is, designed to do the next thing. We need to reframe what the next thing looks like. Because if we want our places to mature, and we want them to mature in a way that reflects not only our values and the character, but just our kind of context of place, we have to actually focus on where people are struggling. What are the things that is the next thing in front of us? So I usually introduce it like this. We need to respond instead of to the big need or the big grant or the big project. We need to actually respond to how people are using our place. At Strong Towns, we have put together a 4-step process, and we have seen city after city after city all around North America adopt this to great success. This is very, very simple. I'm going to walk you through it. If you want, lots of people take pictures of this. You can just go type in Strong Towns 4-step process, and you'll get a whole bunch of stuff describing this. The first step in this process is to go out and humbly observe where people in the community struggle. Where do people have a difficult time using the city as it has been built? I'm going to emphasize humility here. A lot of times as professionals, as technical people, as affluent people, we tend to think we know not only the problem, but the solution. And oftentimes we actually start with the solution and then look for the problem to validate the solution. By humility, I mean go out as if we don't know and say, I am just trying to understand by observing where people are having a difficult time using the city today. Then ask the question, what is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? I'm going to emphasize here, the next smallest thing to address, not what is the thing we can get a grant for, what is the big project we've got coming up in 2 years that we can fold this into, what is the thing we always wanted to do. Again, address, not solve. We're not trying to solve problems. Remember, when Chloe was an infant, we weren't trying to solve problems. We were just maturing into new ones, right? So there's no problem that's ever solved in a community. It's just, how do we address this? How do we address this? How do we mature to the next set of problems? So we're not trying to solve something. We're just trying to make it a little bit better. How do we use the materials we have on hand, the stuff that we can do right now, to make this a little bit better? The step 3 then is to do that thing. Just go do it. Don't send it to a committee. Don't get a consultant to study it for 6 months. Don't write a report. It's just a small little thing. Just go do it. And then the 4th step is to repeat that process over and over and over. What this is it's a process of generating feedback. You're going through a community planning process now. We all are kind of aware of what's going to go down. We're going to be asked to give input here, and we're going to ask to talk here, and then professional people are going to sort through that and try to rank it and validate your concerns. We're going to go through all that. I get that. There's a certain aspect of that that is performative. What we're talking about here is actually changing the feedback loop. Because when we go out and we recognize where people struggle and we try to respond to that struggle with the next smallest thing, what we get is immediate feedback. Do people actually change because of what we've done? If this street is hard to get across and we actually do something small to make it easier, do more people use that street? Do more people cross there? Is it actually easier to do? If it is, success. Let's build on that success. If it's not, we learned at very low cost and very quickly that we got it wrong. Let's go do something else. We treat cities like they are fragile, fragile things. That any step we make has to be this huge undertaking where we do, the next dumb thing that we can all agree on. We do, because we can agree on this, right? Even though we all know it's not the best thing, it's the dumbest thing that we can agree on, right? What I'm talking about is a different way of framing the thing. How do we do the next small thing, the next small thing, the next small thing, and mature our city, watch it grow, watch it change, watch it evolve, watch it become a reflection of us and our values. Because we can look at this process and recognize that, I love this kid. She's a sophomore in college now at the University of Minnesota. This kid from here to here is a hypochondriac. If I sneezed at the dinner table, she's like, what? I'm going to die. This kid is going to she wants to be a doctor. I love this kid. You never get to that without going through all this. You never get to that without going through all this. And so often in building places, what we do is we have a vision. We're here and we want to be here. And we want to skip all of that just to get to here. The thing we have to do is actually have the discipline to recognize that there's tons of beauty in this journey. There's tons of beauty in every one of those steps. And every one of those steps is really, really important to getting us to the next one. And if we try to skip them, yes, we can solve the problem in front of us, but we actually won't get to the place that we're trying to go. I want to just say thank you, everybody, for having me here tonight. If this is the first time you're hearing about Strong Towns, Dimitri, not you, man. You're in. If this is the first time you're hearing about Strong Towns, we do have 3 books out. You can just type in Strong Towns on, go to your local bookstore. You can get any of these books anywhere books are sold. And if you want to know more about what we're doing or get in touch with us, we are 501c3, so all of our stuff is online and free to access and free to use. Strongtowns.org is the place to go. And I am 5 minutes over. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me on this panel. I'm Peter Burke with the Chamber of Commerce. Yes is the short answer, of course. But I think you have to, everyone's gonna have a different viewpoint, right? I came to the island in 2008, so my viewpoint is relatively narrow compared to many in the room and on the island, but I do love this place, and I think it is worth dreaming for. I also would just open with a slight protest. I think Nantucket does have its makeup on. I think it's just going to a different party for today. So I think there's beauty in the fog, and a nice foggy walk through the moors is a good thing. So yeah, thank you very much for having us. That was a great, interesting presentation. I'll pass the mic.
Good afternoon. My name is Beth Ann Meehan. I'm a loan officer at Cape Cod 5. Some of the information on the pamphlet's a little bit outdated. I am actually presently a commissioner at the Nantucket Housing Authority, and I just came off the board of Habitat. But being a loan officer on Nantucket for almost 30 years, my dream is to maintain our year-round community in any way possible. And the big gap right now, as everybody knows, is affordable housing and finding that low bar in, and even middle income, finding that stepping stone, something that is affordable for our working people here on the island. And that's the dream. I'm never going to quit at that. And I do think that collectively this island does want affordable housing. I think we all have to be really brave about where it's going to be and how it's going to happen. And so I am all on board with fresh eyes about zoning and looking at where we can continue to keep our year-round residents here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. My name is Rachael Freeman. I'm the Executive Director of the Land Bank. And yes, thank you for having me as a panelist tonight. Let's see. Well, I want to start by saying that the Land Bank was actually a dream. It was Bill Klein's dream. So when you talk about creating a dream and is Nantucket worth dreaming for? Yes, Nantucket is 100% worth dreaming. And I think that's a fantastic place to start. The Land Bank was created by Bill Klein just as an idea and completely supported by the town of Nantucket and the people of Nantucket and the community of Nantucket at that time, and has continued to be supported since then. And I think it's testament to, dreams can become big ideas. With that in mind too, I think, going forward in terms of dreams, I think the Land Bank really would like to be collaborating, would like to be leaning into the biggest community needs and seeing what is available and ways to participate. And I am a new executive director, so I'm spending a lot of time listening and learning about the community and trying to think collaboratively about how we can be creative and cooperate to do that dreaming.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm Tucker Holland, former housing director for the town, founder of a new housing organization you'll hear more about in the coming months. And of course, Nantucket is worth dreaming about and for. The place itself is so special. We have done an incredible job preserving our natural environment and our history, our built history. And to me, the third leg of the stool is ensuring that our year-round community is here over the long term. And so in the fight with all of you, all of us, I mean, we're all in this together. And I think when we gather for discussions like this, we can solve our biggest problems.
Hi, everyone. Cecil Barron Jensen. I'm the executive director of Remain, but I did start my career actually at the Nantucket Historical Association back in 1996. And so I've had kind of a long view on the town, how we've changed over the years. And, you know, I want to cop a little bit to the reality that we are sort of a fabricated town in many, many ways. You know, we were a whaling community for a brief moment in history. Like, snap your fingers, and that's how long we were a whaling town. So we became a town that was evocative of a whaling time in the 1890s. We started becoming a agricultural community in 1870. We've been trying to be something since 1870, truly. You know, and then we have this moment in time, again, snap your fingers, when Walter Beinecke was building downtown and built some of the sweet little cottages that you might think are really old, but they're not terribly old. They're 1960s cottages. So I think I loved this conversation tonight because it really did ask us to reflect who we are, where we started, how we've evolved, and how we want to change. And to me, that's really important and compelling and definitely worth it. And like everybody else has said, I think the year-round population, I mean, we adore the island. There's nobody who is in this room who doesn't adore Nantucket. And we adore it for every single season of Nantucket. And so we don't mind when our streets are a little slushy and our buildings look a little wonky and our flowers are not blooming. We actually think there's beauty in that too. So yes, we care. We want to look toward the future. We want to understand what our past was with some sense of reality. And then where we go forward, I think, is a great group conversation. And I'm excited to hear what you all think as well.
All right. Is this one working? Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that it's not worth dreaming about Nantucket. Obviously, that's why we're here. But I guess the question is it worth dreaming about Nantucket? Is that the most productive way to sort of approach this exercise? And then how does the dream relate to sort of Chuck's recommendation, which is start just with the simple thing. Look at where people are struggling and then do something. Because I think all of us have experienced planning projects where you focus on the big vision and then nothing happens. So I want to say sort of to you panelists, is it worth dreaming and trying to come up with a big vision, or do we really just want to focus on, let's figure out the actions, and then if we do that, how do we know what the right order is to do things? Can you and then maybe there's another question for Chuck, is how does the vision relate to?
Maybe I would. So, okay. I feel like a lot of times planning processes, let's leave Nantucket and let's go anywhere else in North America. We say we're going to do a master planning process. It's basically like a make work program for planners and engineers. Like, where are we going to be building major infrastructure in the next 20 years? What are we going to rezone this in the next 20 years? Where's the next cookie cutter expansion going to be, right? The underlying, the marketing brochure of modern zoning is that you can build something and then it will be that way forever. We'll zone it R1 and it will be like this, and what we'll put there will be there forever. If we come back, if we're out in Minnesota or anywhere in Massachusetts, we realize that that's crazy. If you go out and build 40 homes, 25 years after you build those 40 homes, everybody's roof needs to be replaced. Everybody's siding is going bad at the same time. Everybody's sidewalks fails at the same time. The whole neighborhood has this like atrophy it goes through all at once. And you see this decline. You see in standard American development, you get a place that's new, and then it has this period of stagnation, and then bam, it declines rapidly to like a lower stage, and then is kind of just fighting the decline all the way down because there's no renewal process. Come back to Nantucket. I said this earlier, your place is like it's battering atrophy all the time. The wind, the rain, like you have to fight constantly to sustain what you have. Physics has revealed to us 4 dimensions. There's people who argue that there are more, and I think someday maybe we will recognize that. But we have the 3 dimensions of space and the dimension of time. The dimension of time we can't undo. Like it just is merciless. And in your place, this place will change over time because that is inevitable. I think the question becomes, do we lock ourselves into a place where that change has to be big and dramatic and disruptive and culturally tense? Or do we open ourselves to an idea that change can be incremental, consensual, affirming as we go? And I do think that is an essential. It comes to our zoning operating system. It comes to the way we run City Hall. It comes to the way we talk to each other. There's a whole bunch of things intertwined here, but to me, that's like the big question when it comes to this idea of change.
It's pretty deep, Chuck. Yeah, in no particular order, response from our panelists. Small steps, big vision.
I don't think we have a choice. I think it's small steps. It has to be. And I because that's just the way we are as humans. And whether we plan, it's going to happen anyway. Like, if all of us, I think every single person in this room knows a street, a house, some part of what we thought was really important to us that is no longer there. It's because of nature. We've definitely, like sheep's. I don't need to bring up the places that have dropped in the ocean in the time that I've lived here on Nantucket. It's really dramatic, but we get used to it as these changes happen. Like, oh yeah, remember there used to be a house there at the end of the street. Oh yeah, now that's gone. We get used to it because that's the way that we as humans are. We just move on. And so, yeah, I love this idea of like fix things that you can right now. If we can do some long-range planning and get ready for bigger issues like sea level rise coming and, erosion on the South Shore, and make sure that our septic sewer beds and everything continue to function. Yeah, we need to do those sorts of really important long-range planning, but at the end of the day, change is inevitable, and we move on as humans. And so I think it is kind of inevitable that the small steps will happen, and they should be happening, and we shouldn't be paralyzed thinking about the long-range plan to not take care of the things that are happening every day.
So, yeah, like I believe, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with 1 step. The small steps add up. But to go back to your question, Peter, is it worth dreaming? Like we're doing here, the process of the master planning. I think like absolutely yes. Like if we as a community can agree on the front end of where we're trying to go, it's going to make all the other decisions and implementations they're all going to fall into place. It was interesting having a conversation at lunch today about how by the time a project is in front of a board, which needs to take some action, like we're way past where we should have been thinking about what do we want our community to look like, and how should it grow, and how should it develop, and how should it remain the same in certain ways.
Thank you. I'm going to build on what everyone else has said, so thank you for leading us off. I completely concur that the first step is the most important, and have that be the smallest step that makes a difference. I think one of the things that's beautiful about taking small steps is that you actually increase the amount of flexibility. So we're constantly being barraged with new information, and there's updated things that are changing. And so if you take these small steps, then you can easily reroute based on the new information that you've been provided. At the same time, I do agree with Tucker that it's good to be dreaming and thinking big thoughts in the background. That's sort of the detail-oriented versus the big picture thinking, right? And our big picture might change over time as we're taking these small steps. And that's okay, because the small steps are flexible. We can reroute. And so I think it's good to do both. But again, if you don't take the small steps, you don't make any changes. So.
Thanks. There's people in this room who have been on this island a lot longer than I have, and have been participating in a lot more comprehensive plans and other sustainability reports that we've done over the years that we've enacted some of them. The majority of the suggestions get shelved, and then we look at it again. So I think big picture wise, going into this process that we're all about to engage in on the island, I think everybody's going to have to come to, what are our core values on this island? Let's think about that. I think you should lead with that as you start going into doing the next steps and the small steps, because on Nantucket, those things are exasperated by the fact that we're out of land. So there are some things that are imperative right now, and it may feel like a big step, and you may feel uncomfortable about it. But I think you need to go back to your core values, like, is our year-round important community, that valuable to us? Because if it's not, that's okay. We can become a community of people on the boat every day, and they can come here and serve the summer community. And this island can get a heck of a lot more quiet in the winter than what it is now. That can be a direction that maybe some people want to go. Maybe people just want to take a walk in the moors when it's really quiet in the winter. And that's the Nantucket that they're used to, and that's their vision of what Nantucket was great, and we want to get back to that. That's not where my heart is. My heart is about the people on this island, and it's conserving community. And I see it deteriorating on a daily basis with doing pre-qualifications for folks to buy in Cape Cod. And it's heartbreaking, because these folks are serving all of us in the hospitals and the schools and the police force, the fire department, and it's a daily basis. So the urgency is now. Small steps are fine until something is before us that feels like a big step, and we have to be brave, and we have to take that chance if it's going to serve the primary home year-round community. And so I would love for that to be sort of a guiding light in this process, and find a way, instead of saying no, find a way to get to yes when affordable housing or some kind of project is presented. Find a way to get to yes if we can.
I'm so happy I had the most time to think about it. I think there's from my own brain, right, the instant gratification of a small step, right? If you have a overgrown lawn, you mow it, feels good. It takes 5 minutes, right? It's great. It's an easy thing. I think bike paths out here are probably my equated instant gratification. I was here when the Hummock Pond Road bike path was not there, and now it is here, and it was my bike route to work for a long time. So I was incredibly appreciative of what, on the grand scheme of things of projects, was a small step. I understand a lot of things had to go into that. So I do think there's a lot of value into that first small step, because it becomes a tangible bite and a relatable bite for the entire community to kind of see and touch and feel and taste, because it's very easy to see a disconnect or have that disconnect between meetings like this, presenters who are incredibly talented and have all the, chops in the world of their positions, but then it comes down to that kitchen table conversations, right? That the post office is having, and talking to my friends and neighbors that don't have the time to go to town meetings and don't have time to go to meetings like this because it might be working 2 jobs or for whatever gazillion different reasons. I think those tangible small steps are important, even though big steps may be coming. They're an important step to take because it becomes real, becomes a real thing that you can see that was different and now it's this and it was that. And as a lot of people have said too, the landscape's changing under us anyway, in terms of not even just physically the landscape, but time marches on, so we have to make changes.
All right, thanks. Well, we're getting closer to the end of this, but we did want to give folks a chance to ask a few questions in the time that we have left. I think particularly we want to put off for now the debate about what we do next, large and small, and really take advantage of the remaining time we have with Chuck to see if there's any particular questions or response to what he talked about that we wished we would have asked him the next time we get together and he's not here. And maybe Laurel and Livia, you can pass mics.
Hi, thanks. I thought that was great. I'm curious if you've been traveling.
Oh.
Okay. All right. That was terrific. Thank you so much. If you've traveled lots and lots of places and you've seen maybe a place sort of like Nantucket, and you referred to something that you saw today that people said, oh, this is really great and made you sad, can you illuminate us on what that is and why? And you don't need to say the location, but the spirit of it, why? And then the other thing is, if you were to just out of your mind think of a place that you're like, wow, that was a great thing that they did, and they kicked it off, and they somewhere, just as an inspiration story.
Okay, I will try. Thank you. So we visited everything today, like the whole island. There was one new development in particular where there were relatively new homes being built last 10 years. And, we were looking at it like, oh yeah, this is, this new, that. And it did make me sad because besides this siding, which was, your veneer, yeah, I mean, they could have been clad in anything and dropped into any city and it would have just been normal. And, to me, that was a huge missed opportunity because you do have a unique character and a unique building form and is a very unique place. And I also think that there is a need for something more, not something that would be cookie cutter, but something that would be more, I think. The Rosemary Beach example I gave was one where you could essentially say like, okay, these things were all from a pattern book, but they all came out differently and had different sizes and different price points and different scales. And that's kind of what I felt was missing. It was like, well, this is a neighborhood and all these homes are $1 million. And it's like, wow, that's not affordable to anybody that I know. But that was like new housing. And I looked at that and I thought, well, there's got to be a way to have more than one price point in this neighborhood, and a price point that would be significantly lower and maybe one that would be higher and have an actual place, an actual neighborhood. Well, and let me say this, anytime you build a subdivision like that, where like all the streets empty out onto a collector street, you're just manufacturing congestion. The big challenge that you have here is that you could build 500,000 new homes and they would all sell and people would want to live here. You essentially have infinite demand. And so you're not like a different place where you could build your way out of like a supply crunch. You literally can't do that. And so when you build, you have to actually make really valuable use of the space if you're going to retain price points and if you're going to retain community. If you're also going to be able to do it geometrically by forcing everybody to drive to work, to drive to the store, to drive everywhere, you also like cap your maturing because everybody's going to get funneled onto the same road and you're just going to have year-round unmitigated congestion, let alone in the peak times. And so to me, it was an opportunity to not only build a more complex neighborhood that would have allowed more price points and more diversity and just like been better from a better use of space, but also to do it in a way where a lot of those people who live there wouldn't have to have 2 cars in a family and wouldn't have to drive places and wouldn't have to, or would be more amicable to, if a bus picked them up, to take them to town and back, being able to use that as a way to get around. So to me, it was like going in the opposite direction in the name of like a tiny bit of progress. So if you say like, where's like a really good place that has done really good work? It's actually the most common question that I get. And this isn't exactly the question you asked, but every time I go, it's like, who's the place that's like us that we can copy and learn from? And, I brought Santorini up because I actually feel like it doesn't look anything like you and it's not going to feel anything like you. And they're Greeks, so they're very strange in ways that are fun and unique, but like different, right? That being said, I do think the way that they balance what you would just call off-islanders and the year-round people was something worth looking at and learning from. Because if you live there, I met people who were from there, like I'm from here. I also met people who were like, I grew up in Athens, but I moved here. Both of them identified with the place in a way that was really, really healthy and also at price points where they could live a decent life and belong there. And yes, it was limited because, again, Santorini is a place where if you just built high rises along the shoreline, they would all sell out and they'd all fill up. Like there's unlimited demand. So they were able to meet human needs while recognizing that there's still pent up demand that they can't meet. That's a hard line to walk. Does that make sense?
To dominate this conversation, but I'm just going to say the thing that I find really interesting on Nantucket is we also have a population spike, and we have generational different islanders now who will live at home with their parents, or I shouldn't say with their parents, but it's like Massachusetts had the triple decker, right? So you had families that lived on the first floor, second floor, third floor, or you have communities where there's a accessory unit, like people live together. And with the amount of needs that the island has, I want a plumber, I want an electrician, I want somebody to be able to do things. We don't have, they're coming over on the boat.
Well, let me just say this in general. I think I was born in 1973, so I'm a Gen Xer. I read once that every generation has tension with the generation that came before them, which in my case is the boomers, and bewilderment by the generation after them, which is the millennials for me. So my tension with the boomers is that, there's many, but let's focus on the one that's pertinent. There's an assumption that everybody wants to live like them. So they grew up in a time where everybody got a single family home with a garage and a yard and 2 cars. And there's this assumption that that is what it means to have a house and have a life and live. And so in a sense, like everything's programmed to repeat that over and over and over again. And I think what we're finding is that as we get into this millennial generation, and even to a degree the generation after them, although they're not quite in the home buying age yet, but the millennials are, they do not want the same thing. And they are for price point reasons, but also for social cultural reasons and others, willing to live in ways that the boomers in particular look at and go, ugh, really? Weird, strange. It's funny because those ways of living actually mimic historical patterns of living more than this kind of anomaly that we had during the baby boomers' life. I think the one thing that the baby boomers have a difficult time recognizing is that they are literally the bubble. That every aspect of their life, as you track it, has been the peak of everything. The peak number of kids in school, the peak number of people building new homes, the peak number of vacation rentals, the peak number of Harley Davidsons for sale. Harley Davidson is now going bankrupt because all the boomers bought them when they were in their 50s and now are too old to ride them anymore. So if you want to invest in like healthcare and mortuary services, because that's going to be the booming industries, and then it'll be something else. And so you look at that. I think if the boomers could step back and realize that they are an historical anomaly at every phase of their life, they will stop trying to impose that living style on everybody who comes after them. And that would be a huge service to society. Is that okay? I don't want to make people mad, but that's
Thank you very much. My name is Penny Dye, and one of the things that I think is really important that has not yet been mentioned here is the fact that nearly 60% of our island is in conservation forever, which is wonderful, but that is a major factor contributing to the lack of affordability here on Nantucket. And I'd like to ask the panel, and sorry, Rachel, to put you on the spot, but the land bank, it seems to me, has really come close to accomplishing their mission. And I'd like to know, do you have a strategic plan? What's for the next chapter? Is there a way that you've talked about wanting to work with the other housing entities? I just think things are going to have to change going forward in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much. To respond to Penny's question, let's see. So the land bank is run by a commission, right, which is 5 publicly elected officials, and ultimately they make the decisions. I am the executive director of the organization, so speaking on behalf of the organization, I would only be speaking as the executive director. But ultimately the commissioners make the decisions. And again, they're publicly elected officials. So everyone has the right to vote on who is elected and thereby who's making the decisions for the land bank. So when it comes to strategic planning and thoughts for the future, as I said, I'm pretty new to the executive director role, and I'll be frank about that. I am spending a lot of time trying to figure out what are the ways to collaborate, what are the needs for the island. The land bank has been in existence since 1984. We're governmental. We were created by an act of the state legislature and voted into existence by the town of Nantucket. What Penny says is true. It's somewhere between 50, 60s on the high end, but around half the island is conserved open space. The land bank is by far not the largest landholder on the island. In fact, we own 1/3 of the land of the largest landholder on the island. And I think as far as strategic planning goes, the commissioners recognize that there's a lot of planning to be done going forward. I think everyone is evolving, kind of as we've been discussing tonight about towns, and everyone evolves, right? The land bank isn't the baby anymore. And so what does that mean for the land bank? You know, who are they and what do they become? I think these are all things that are being discussed. Do we have a strategic plan at this second? No, but these are thoughts. We definitely operate within an act, which basically defines conservation, recreation, and open space, and what we can do within those pieces of the puzzle. So that's the overarching document that guides us. And I think, you know, you bring up an excellent question and valid points that we need to be thinking about. So thank you.
Can I add 2 things? Because with respect, there were a couple of things in your question that I, as an outsider, would maybe push back on gently. The first one is that we're out of the idea that we're out of land. Taking aside everything that's in conservation and just looking at the rest. I'm going to say this, and I say this generously to all of you. This is not to put your place down. It's not like it's a great use of space. Without going over 2 stories, if you want to keep it that, you could triple the number of housing units you have, and just by using space better. So I feel like if we're going to stick to like the cookie cutter thing, your assertion is closer to reality. If we're actually going to look at the space and say we're going to develop this in a more thoughtful, more sophisticated manner, you're nowhere near out of space. The other thing that I think needs some nuance is part of your question put a connection between building more units and the affordability of housing. And I think in general, there's a supply and demand relationship there that we could look at in other cities and other places. But I hesitate to be confident that that applies here. Because like I said, I feel like your demand is infinite in all practical purposes, and your supply will always be like limited in the face of that demand. So unlike, say, the housing conversation in Boston, where they're like, we need to build a lot more units, that's how we'll lower price. I actually don't think that that will actually work here. I think if you want to lower prices, you actually have to build something different in a different way than what you're doing now, because you actually won't reach a supply-demand dynamic that gets you to lower prices. Does that make sense? Okay. So I just a couple of nuance.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I think it's going to require restricting markets in many different ways, and there are lots of tools to do that. I mention the amount of conservation land simply because that is a factor of supply and demand and rising costs here. Thank you.
Question up here. I saw first.
Thank you. Different topic. If the options that we're familiar with are completely unaffordable taxes in order to pay for maintenance of the already built infrastructure on the one hand, or almost unaffordable taxes and not paying for the maintenance on the already built infrastructure, what's option C? And how do we get there from here?
That's a big question.
Well, option C is have less infrastructure. I mean, the reality is that you've run pipes and roads and stuff all over the island that you're not getting the value out of it that you put in the ground. And so, it's covered up a bit by your affluence because there is tax base to tax. And I don't say that cavalierly, right? But there is, it's not like the little city where I did the study where they literally were living in trailer houses and had no money. There's wealth you can tax here to pay for some of these things. But the reality is that like every suburban city, as you have imposed the suburban development model on your island, it is very infrastructure intense and tax base diffuse. And that math just doesn't work. And so ultimately, you either have to make better use of the infrastructure you have, so more connections per foot, more, more productivity, or you need to abandon some of that infrastructure and do things differently. And I saw a lot of instances today where you could do both. Those are hard conversations, but that's the only way to solve that.
One or two more questions?
Hi. Is this on? Okay. So we're talking about building a new nursing home on the island. And one of the biggest, and it's certainly needed, that's not necessarily the issue, but it is, one of the issues is staffing and where are they going to live? I mean, when you think about our island, and I think about the hospital, when I started working there in '75, we all were year-rounders. We worked there. We ended up buying our houses. We were the boomers, okay? And Now, healthcare really requires a lot of travelers. And the travelers that came in the 70s and 80s, they were happy living in a dorm. And now all of a sudden the travelers are bringing their husbands with them because they've sold their houses and they're traveling around the country. Oh, and by the way, I want my dog. And I know for a fact that we've lost a few people because of the dog thing. But the island home, the nursing home, the schools, etc., these people are making like $24 an hour. This is not rich. So $1 million renting is crazy. So is there a formula or some sort of national thing? And I know that the people have done a really good job. I'm not criticizing them, but it's time to sort of step back and take a more global approach. As you keep talking about, you could do it differently. Because what I need as a clinician working at the nursing home or a teacher or the fire or the police is not the same as maybe a landscaper who's, seasonal. Do you see what I mean? Because
Well, I was going to say it's slightly related, I think, to some of the questions too. I think density becomes an issue, right? Are we talking about, if we're building new units, let's just say we figure out a way to stack another layer on some existing homes, in a wide brushstroke. Are we talking about adding people to the island or redistributing the people we have, right? So I'm a 40-year-old person with 2 housemates. Each one of us in any other town in America would have our own home. Here we are. I'm lucky. I have stable housing and I have good people to live with, but I think there's an issue where, and I think it's kind of related, is if we're willing to change the way we're willing to live and how we're going to live and concede the single family home for every single resident, then I think those needs do change, right? That's the need-based changes, but you have to be cognizant too, if we put another 10,000 people on the island, is that another 10,000 people to the 2 grocery stores, the 3 gas stations, that the infrastructure is finite at its current levels. I think we saw an artificial spike when COVID hit, right? Secondary homes became primary homes and all those core infrastructures were taxed a little more. So I think, it's a thought. I don't have the answer by any means, so this is great because I can just throw out questions. But my suggestion would be, of course, I know Tucker's been working on it, just with the housing as a brief example. Some of the measures in place are to retain people that otherwise would have to leave. And the other is to make sure that people here are living safely and not, 15 people to a 3-bedroom house in conditions that aren't really fit for it. So it's like it's not the only part of the equation, but it's one of the weights on the scales. I think that's really important, that growth is good, but thoughtful growth and making sure that it might be just density growth instead of population growth.
So in Vail, Colorado, no one who works for the city can afford to live in the city. So they live outside the city and they get bussed in every day. What it means is that they have a high turnover because the people who work there are just workers. They're replaceable. They don't have in a sense, I'm going to say it, and this is a little more dramatic than I mean it, but they don't have a stake in the community. Like they're not there like building up the place. When you take that and you extend that, it's one thing when it is we had a Bulgarian woman who served us lunch today, and it's very interesting to me because a lot of places like this will have, especially Eastern European workers who come here, they tend to come here for a few years. They can make up way higher wages. They will save, they will send money back, and then they will go back. And so it's in a sense like I'm doing a rotation, the same way that people rotate up to the ships in Alaska, for 2 weeks in the summer to make 6 months of wages in 2 weeks. That's what they're doing. They're sacrificing part of their life to get a jump start. It's one thing to have your server at the restaurant be that. It's another thing to have your teacher be that, your kid's teacher, your nurse, your doctor, because these are people that you build relationship with. Who's your dentist? Well, if you got to switch dentists every 18 months because they cycle in and out, what kind of relationship is that? Who's your family practitioner? Who's your kid's teacher? Who's the minister at your church? If these things are that precarious, what you see is that you develop a transactional culture where there's a class of people who are coming here to, in a sense, suck money out and you pay them a premium because you don't want to make them a long-term part of the community. And making them a long-term part of the community, again, takes intention, but that's the side effect. So in Vail, that's what they have. Everybody's a transient worker, and the long-term relationships are gone. And that is an outcome. That is one option on the table.
Wow.
I just was going to add a little bit of it. So George Ruther from Vail was here last year, and one of the things they're trying to do to combat that is to repurpose some of their existing inventory. In a ski town, there are a lot of condominiums and so forth. And I think part of what we really need to do is to repurpose some of our existing inventory. The point I think that Chuck was making earlier about half of the land is conserved, but half of the land is not. It's really a question of how we're using the half that is not. And you're not going to get around in a place like Nantucket the economics. You're 100% correct. You have to be earning today 7 times the area median income to afford the median home. That's just when people came back in the 70s and 80s. You hear a lot of stories. I worked 2 or 3 jobs. I saved. I scrimped. I put it together. Not possible. Not possible to work 7 full-time jobs. So it takes subsidy. And this is a small advertisement for why I'm a huge fan of the transfer fee for housing here.
I just wanted to add that the Land Bank is, in fact, also a huge advocate for the transfer fee for housing, and we will support this in whatever way we can. I just wanted to mention one more thing, which Peter touched on as well, which is that this concept of owning a single-family home where you live by yourself. We live. You mentioned you have roommates. We live in a home, and we rent to somebody in our basement and somebody in another portion of the house. So we collaboratively live together, and we have a family, and it's just a different way of living.
Me too. Yeah, I love that. Who was it that said, we've got 50% in conservation and the other 50%? Honestly, we got a lot in that other 50%. And so this is kind of inspiring. So it's halfway between the little steps, like let's fix the road so that our cars don't have to go off island to be repaired. But let's also make sure that we're using the infrastructure that we have to maximize the value that we care about. And that's, I love that you said that too.
And the other thing about repurposing the existing inventory is it's built. It is so much faster.
The most sustainable building that you could ever have is the one that's already built. So, yeah. Yeah, and if you are going to demolish it, let's make sure we repurpose the stuff in the inside and the outside and the windows and everything else, because, that is more sustainable as well.
And just to touch on, whenever I talk about preserving our year-round community, and affordable housing, I'm talking about housing the people that are already here. Ann Kuspa Housing Nantucket, she held a lottery for Wiggles Way. And am I quoting it right? Was there 600 applicants? Now, these are people, when they apply, you have to put that you're a year-round resident, and they verify. They make sure that you're here year-round, and that's how you got into the lottery. That's just 600 people right now that have nowhere affordable to live, and never mind getting into the dignified housing part of it, because we've all heard nightmare stories. So I'm not talking about creating more housing to bring new 10,000 people from off island here at all. I'm just talking about providing a roof over the head for the people who are part of our community workforce. I'm hopeful that part of our vision for the future will include the island home. I do think that's that's really just the most amazing thing that Nantucket does for our elder citizens. And maybe we'll get to the point where the people who are here year round that are aging, my myself included, maybe we can downsize to something that is affordable and free up space, and then deed restrict it to make sure that in perpetuity that house is only sold to a year-round resident. These are all things we can do as a community, but we have to have the will behind it, together, because as we all know, we all get on town meeting floor and we get some sharpshooters that will start pulling apart why they don't want something somewhere. And I really think the overriding big picture should be, let's get to yes somehow for primary year-round residences.
I said, don't forget the homeless. I mean, we have homeless population on Nantucket, as much as people may not want to admit that or talk about it, but it's a reality. And the warming place, thank God for them, they're doing a great job, and they need support. But let's find people a place to live that's respectful and can meet their needs also. These are our friends, our family, and our neighbors, whether we like to admit it or not, because nobody wants to think of their family member being homeless, so just saying.
All right. Well, as you've all realized, we've achieved the fullness of time. And now we must move on. If you're desperate to buttonhole Chuck, he's going to be here till tomorrow. If you have something you'd like to insert into the process, grab one of us on the consulting group and make sure we take notes about what your concern is. Leslie or Dave, you want to give us a benediction?
Just want to again thank everyone for attending, and please stay engaged in this process because it will create a much better outcome for the community. I'd like to thank Chuck and the panelists for putting themselves out there, and have a great night. Thank you.